Every mother in Jamaica passes down a genetic signature almost untouched by colonization. The maternal DNA of most Jamaicans traces back to West Africa with remarkable consistency. But when scientists sequenced the paternal line instead, the DNA passed only from father to son. The picture changed so dramatically that Jamaica turned out to have the highest number of a specific origin of any Caribbean population ever tested. And it wasn't African. We've already shown you what Jamaican maternal DNA reveals about West African ancestry, and how closely, in some surprising ways, it lines up with history. But mitochondrial DNA only tells half the story. It follows mothers, and mothers only, back through time. The other half of the story is carried by fathers, passed from father to son through the Y-chromosome, virtually unchanged for thousands of years. In a population shaped by one of the most violent systems of forced labor in human history, there was no reason to assume the paternal story would look anything like the maternal one. In 2012, a team of geneticists finally sequenced it, comparing Jamaican Y-chromosome DNA against West and Central African populations, other Caribbean islands, and African American populations in the United States. What they found on the paternal side didn't just add detail to the maternal story, it exposed something the maternal DNA had been quietly hiding the entire time. To understand why researchers expected the paternal line to look different, you have to understand something basic about how DNA is inherited, and something brutal about how Caribbean slave societies were actually structured. Mitochondrial DNA passes only from mother to child. Y-chromosome DNA passes only from father to son. If a population's ancestors mixed evenly, regardless of sex, both lines should tell roughly the same story. But history rarely works evenly. Under British colonial rule in Jamaica, the enslaved population was overwhelmingly African, and the plantation-owning and overseer class was overwhelmingly European and male. Historical records, court documents, plantation ledgers, contemporary accounts describe widespread, systemic sexual exploitation of enslaved and formerly enslaved women by European men in positions of total legal power over them. This wasn't a matter of occasional, isolated mixing. It was structural, backed by a legal system that gave enslavers near total control over the women they held in bondage. There was also a documented social pattern layered on top of this. Children born of mixed parentage were, in many recorded cases, given comparatively more favorable positions within the plantation system, placed as domestic workers or tradespeople rather than field labor, and were statistically far more likely to eventually be granted freedom by their fathers or owners. That pattern, repeated over generations, didn't just affect individual families. It shaped the demographic and genetic makeup of the entire island over time. Historians had described this pattern in writing for decades. What nobody had was a direct genetic measurement of exactly how large its impact turned out to be. In 2012, that measurement finally came. And it didn't just confirm what the history books already said. It gave a hard number to a history that had mostly been described in general terms, and that number was higher than almost anyone expected. The study analyzed Y-chromosome genetic markers in over 1,300 men across 4 groups: 508 men from 12 different West and Central African populations, 188 men from 2 Caribbean islands, 532 African American men from Washington, D.C. and South Carolina, and 91 European American men used as a genetic reference point. Y-chromosome DNA is ideal for this kind of comparison because it isolates a single, uninterrupted paternal line. Researchers used specific genetic markers along the Y-chromosome to classify each man's paternal lineage as most closely related to West and Central African reference populations, or to European reference populations. And further, to identify which specific African region that African-associated lineage most closely matched. This allowed the team to answer two separate questions at once. For the portion of paternal ancestry that was African, which specific West African region did it trace back to Tiu? And separately, what percentage of paternal ancestry across each population wasn't African at all? The African portion of the answer mostly confirmed what history already suggested. The other number is the one that made Jamaica stand out from every other population in the entire study. Start with the African paternal lineages. Among Caribbean and Washington, D.C. populations, paternal ancestry showed the closest genetic affinity to populations from the Bight of Biafra, the Niger Delta region, homeland of the Igbo people. That's a meaningful confirmation. It lines up with historical shipping patterns into the British Caribbean, and it echoes what we've already covered about Igbo cultural influence still present in Jamaican language and tradition today. Here's the number that stood apart from everything else in the study. Across every population sampled, paternal lineages in the Americas showed a striking pattern. Somewhere between 30 and 40% of all paternal DNA in African-descended populations traced back to European ancestry, not African. And of every single population measured in the study, Caribbean, African American, every group tested, Jamaica had the highest proportion of all, just over 41% European paternal ancestry. Compare that to the maternal side, which we covered in an earlier investigation. Overwhelmingly, consistently West African, generation after generation, with only a small European signal. The contrast is the entire point. European ancestry entered the Jamaican gene pool almost exclusively through one direction: fathers, not mothers. That's not a subtle statistical pattern. It's a direct, measurable, generations-deep genetic record of exactly the structural exploitation the historical documents had already described. Except now, it isn't just described. It's quantified, written permanently into the Y-chromosome of a large share of Jamaican men alive today. This isn't a story about a population that mixed and blended over time in some neutral, even way. It's the genetic record of a specific, one-directional pattern of power. And it matches, almost exactly, what historians have described in writing for generations from court records, plantation accounts, and the demographic patterns of who was granted freedom and who wasn't. Understanding this isn't about assigning shame to anyone alive today. It's about being honest about where the full ancestry of the Jamaican people actually comes from and how it got there. Not just the parts that are comfortable to talk about, but the parts written in cold, permanent genetic data. If you're of Jamaican or wider Caribbean descent, your own paternal line, if traced, may carry exactly this same asymmetry. A piece of family history no document in your family ever wrote down, but your DNA already has. We've now covered both sides of Jamaica's ancestry, the maternal line and the paternal line, and they tell two very different stories about how this population actually came to exist. If there's a specific island, region, or historical thread from either video you want us to go deeper on next, tell us in the comments. And if uncovering the real, documented history hidden inside the African and Caribbean diaspora matters to you, subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel exists to do.